So we recently got further information on the first Diablo 4 expansion, the Vessel of Hatred. Some of the big pieces of information being the first time we actually got the name of the class coming with this expansion, being the Spiritborn, and we also got a small amount of additional information for this class. But if you've been following my channel for a while or following different leaks from like 8 months ago, we already knew the name of this class, and we have a bunch of additional information that we have still officially not gotten. Now, officially, the only information we have on the Spiritborn class is a small paragraph. And this reads, the Spiritborn, apex predator of the jungle, is poised to strike. Battle with styles and mystical synergies that can only be awakened deep beneath the jungle's canopy with an entirely new class to the iconic Diablo series. And we will learn more about the Spiritborn on July 18th. And this is legitimately all we got. Now, we did get some screenshots of this class where we got some further information, specifically that this class will be using a dual-sided glaive, but past that, we haven't gotten really any other information from official sources. But we have a bunch of leaks from like 8 months ago that go into a lot more detail, and all of these other leaks surrounding this ended up just being completely true. So I want to go over some of the information from these leaks pertaining to the Spiritborn. Now, the first bit of these leaks we got was a write-up that kind of explained some of the things coming with the expansion. Now, I'm not sure if these leaks were directly from Blizzard and they were going to announce this stuff back at BlizzCon, or if this was just someone taking some of the information we later got in some leaked files and adding some lore into it and making these write-ups themselves. But either way, pretty much all the information in these first write-ups ended up being true based on later leaks. Now, one of the really interesting parts is about the resources the Spiritborn is going to have, because when looking at the files, which is what we're going to go over later in this video, we do actually see that the Spiritborn is going to have 2 resources. Now, also in the files, we see one of the resources is going to be called Vigor. This write-up also has the second resource being called Allegiance, which I couldn't find in the file leaks. But in this write-up, Vigor represents their physical vitality and endurance gained from their bond with the Earth and Sky. Earth and Sky will also play a pretty big role in this class. It fuels their physical abilities and allows them to perform feats of agility and strength beyond normal capabilities. So based off of this, it seems like Vigor, which is one of the 2 resources, is going to be more based on physical capabilities, probably movement abilities and any abilities that are like melee or physically using different weapons. But then we have the second resource. So Allegiance, on the other hand, represents their spiritual connection to nature and its creatures. It is through Allegiance that they can call upon the spirits of nature for aid, summoning ethereal allies for invoking powerful elemental spells. One of the really interesting parts is that invoking is actually something you see a lot in the files. I'm not actually sure what invoking is for the Spiritborn, but it is something that appears quite a lot. Now, another really interesting part about these first leaks is the description of the Glaive, which, as we've seen from the official reveals, the Spiritborn is using a dual-sided glaive. So their weapon of choice is a glaive, a symbol of their connection to both the physical and spiritual realms, which would make sense as a dual-sided glaive. The glaive is more than just a weapon to a Spiritborn. It is the extension of their spirit, a conduit through which they channel their power. Now, back when these leaks first came out, the first thing I thought of is that the glaive wouldn't be a physical weapon you actually loot. The glaive would be more a thing you kind of conjure that is connected to the Spiritborn that you use for most of your power. Now, there's a few ways you could go about this. The glaive could be a physical weapon, and maybe it's the only weapon the Spiritborn uses, which I think is a really low chance that happens. It's a loot-based game. They wouldn't want the class to only literally have one weapon to be able to use, and if the glaive is so integral and specific to the Spiritborn, you can't really have glaives just be one of the handful of weapons you use, because it wouldn't make sense for you to just be running around with a mace when the glaive is literally where all of your power comes from. So my best guess is that you will still be looting weapons, but those will just be stat sticks, and you will basically always have this glaive that you probably conjure, and that's the main weapon you're actually using. Or just when using any of your abilities that apply to a glaive, you just kind of pull out a glaive and use it, but it's not an actual weapon. They could also do something pretty interesting as well, where you have an additional weapon slot that's always a glaive, and you always have a glaive in that slot, but you also have like another weapon. So maybe glaives only drop for you, but you always have to have have one glaive equip in like another slot, kind of like how barbarians have 4 different weapons. Instead, the Spiritborn would just have like maybe 2 and one would always be a glaive. Starting with some pieces of these resources, so we have some of these files here that mention that you generate primary or secondary resources as being passives. We have empowered primary and secondary. Not exactly sure what that could entail, but there could just be a way to empower these different resources. Maybe you like overcharge one resource or go into a different stance, which styles are actually mentioned in the official reveal. So you could be like switching styles to empower one. We also have something called Vengeance, and this is under proc. So this could potentially be the name of a secondary resource, or it could just be another effect that pertains to one of the resources. We also have Incarnate Activate, which could be some like ultimate or some other effect tied to resources. Then we also have Invoke. We've gone over some invoking already, and we'll go over more in these files, but I'm not sure if Invoke is an actual mechanic. Like going over a lot of these files, the closest thing I thought of was maybe Invoke is the Spiritborn's unique class mechanic like every other class has. Druid has the Spirit Boons, Barbarians has the 4 weapons with their techniques, the Necromancer has their Book of the Dead, so maybe Invoke could be their unique class mechanic. And then as mentioned, we also have some files pertaining to Vigor specifically, and specifically to different affixes you can get on gear. So you can get the max Vigor affix, the cost reduction affix. On kill you get Vigor, a lesser cost reduction, and then max Vigor on your jewelry. So Vigor is definitely one of the resources. It seems to be the more main resource that would be the equivalent of other resources from other classes, like Spirit on a Druid would have basically all of these affixes, or Essence on a Necromancer. Vigor does seem to be that kind of main resource that's probably going to be in the right globe on your UI. And based upon all of the files I've been looking through without the other resource being specifically named, it seems like the secondary resource is going to be used in some other way besides being in a globe on the right side of your screen, kind of how Necromancers also have corpses, to where that plays as a second resource. It's just something physically in the world and not on your UI. So the secondary resource for the Spiritborn could work in kind of a similar way. Now, one thing that seems to be pretty important with the Spiritborn is their different natural elements, and these seem to be either some elements that's used in their different abilities, like maybe how a Druid uses Earth, they could use these as like a damage type, or these could possibly be their different spell categories. So like how every other class has different categories, like some that all the classes share, like basic or core skills, and then some that are more specific to different classes, like Necromancers would have a curse. But based off these files, it seems like the Necromancer is going to have sky, plains, forest, and soil. These 4 different things are all throughout these different files. Some are connected to skills. Later in this video, we're going to go over some talents that were already outlined in these files that also mention all of these. So these are going to be 4 main, pretty important pieces to the Spiritborn. And again, whether that be different damage types they have, or whether this be how all of their skills are categorized and segmented. But this file mentions a few different things, because we have like sky basic, sky core, we have plains core and plains basic, we have forest basic and core, and then we have soil basic and core. And things like this make this much more interesting, but also much harder to figure out, because this does seem to be working in a little bit of a different way from other classes. Because as I mentioned, I don't know if these different elements are just categories of spells, or if these are different damage types. Going through here, it kind of seems like these are different damage types, where you would have a basic category and a core category, but then you would have skills that are sky basic or sky core. So instead of like a Necromancer having a blood core skill or a bone core skill, the Spiritborn would have a plains core skill or a forest core skill. So that could be the categorization of these, or maybe these play into different elements of the Spiritborn. Like we know styles have already been mentioned officially. Maybe that's like some different type of stance where you switch stances and it changes how the skill works. So maybe you switch to a different style and it changes like a sky skill to like a forest skill. So there's a bunch of different possibilities, but I think either way you look at it, this class does seem to be quite unique. And I think some more elements that may point to this be categorization of different spells is we have things like plains mobility or soil control or soil defense and offense. Then we have a forest mobility and sky mobility. And then we also have things like forest control and forest defense. So it seems like all 4 of these different elements also have a bunch of different categories on this class. So you would have all these 4 different elements with different mobility skills tied to each or most of them. And as we've been going over these leaks, invoke has come up multiple times, and here we have some additional information. We have invoke sky ruler, invoke sky warning, invoke sky AoE, we have invoke plains nova, we have invoke forest shockwave, we have invoke soil cast. And when looking at pretty much everything that mentions invoke, I still have no idea what invoke is supposed to be. It seems like it's pointing more towards it being some type of augment to everything else, because in some of the talents it mentions invoke, but it almost mentions them like they're going to be capstones. But then we have invokes like this that seem like you're empowering or augmenting different skills you're using. So you're invoking a skill, sounds like you're empowering it in some way. So still not really sure what this is. I still go back to my best guess is that this is the unique class mechanic for the Spiritborn, and you're basically able to invoke any other part of the Spiritborn and empower it or change it in some way. And this last section of the video, I wanted to go over a bunch of different things mentioned as being in your talents. Now, the first part of this kind of throws a wrench in a lot of the other stuff we've gone over, because there are things called combos in your talents, and all of these are 2 of those different elements combined. So you have a soil sky, sky plains, sky forest, plains soil, forest plains, soil forest. So those different elements we've gone over that seem to be either different ways to categorize parts of the class or potentially different damage types now have some combination in the files to combine elements of both of them. So again, I really don't know how these are actually going to play out, especially now that you can combine any of these elements together. It does make it quite interesting. And based off a lot of these files, there could be a lot of customization based upon this, but it does make it pretty hard to kind of figure out what's going on here. And then we just do have different talent sections for all of those different elements. So we have talents for forests, so forest 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have talents for plains 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have talents for sky 1 through 4. And then we have talents for soil 1 through 4. So we also have talents specific to all of these different elements. Then you have a combination of all these different elements, which are pretty interesting that you'll be able to put in different talent points to go into, like, say, forest. But then you could also go and put talent points into combining like sky and forest. Not exactly sure how this is all going to combine, but it could be pretty interesting. And then we also get a look at ultimates. Now we get no information on this. They're just labeled as ultimates 1 through 12, which is kind of how ultimates work for all the other classes. You have the 3 ultimates with 2 upgrades for each ultimate, but this would also entail having more than that. So maybe with the expansion, every class is getting a new ultimate and they're starting Spiritborn at another ultimate, or maybe some of the other passes in the trees are also considered to be ultimates. Not exactly sure, but this is just obviously showing there's going to be an ultimate category. And then we have something that gets more interesting again, because in the same spots as all of these other talents, we have invoke sky, invoke plains, invoke forest, and invoke soil. No idea what invoke does, but when you can just invoke one of these different categories or elements, and then you also have in the talents to be able to specialize into an element and then combine elements, it seems like there may be some intricacy in combining all of these different elements, because now you can also invoke them. So going back to invoke potentially being like some buff or augment of what you're using, you could invoke sky while you're using like a combination of sky forest, and it would invoke maybe just the sky stuff even though it's combined with forest. Maybe it would also invoke those combinations, but there's just a bunch of possibilities when going through these files. This class legitimately does seem pretty interesting. So after looking at all these files, I think the Spiritborn is at the very least going to be a very interesting and unique class. Looking at a bunch of these files, it definitely seems like there's going to be some crazy combination possibilities just based upon it being built around these 4 different elements of sky, plains, forest, and soil, and having ways to combine the elements and having ways to potentially like buff or empower different elements. So this class is definitely seeming to be pretty interesting, but that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.